Hello there, we've just come to the end of round 8 and obviously here with Wags, who was victorious 2-0, but by no means an easy 2-0.
No, possibly the hardest match I played all day, but they all have.
Now you said you got this deck off the internet, and for those of you who know your standard at the moment, this is the bog standard Jund deck, but we're going to go through a few of the cards, and basically the whole theme about this weekend is we're looking at the metagame shift from before Dragon's Maze to after Dragon's Maze, because typically what players tend to do is they take an existing archetype and they add the new cards in.
Right.
Now, Voice of Resurgence was the one card that popped out from the set. This deck obviously ain't going to be using that, but it probably has to react in some way to other people using Voice of Resurgences. So let's look at the cards. What was the setup like before Dragon's Maze came in?
Before, it was largely similar, except for these two cards. I'll talk through the deck as this is, and then move on to how it changes. The core of the deck really is these three creatures here.
So we've got Huntmaster of the Fells, Thragtusk,
and Olivia Voldaren. These two creatures gain life and are very big for their cost. Thragtusk is very hard to deal with. Huntmaster is surprisingly good when you're able to, if you play in such a way that you're able to flip him, because on the other side, when he turns over, he becomes a 4/4 Trampler, which was relevant in that game where I was able to trample over a dead worm for 4. And also, when it flips, it deals 2 damage to your opponent and 2 to a creature. So if you can flip it, it tends to kill something, and you get quite a lot of good value.
That you had to beat was Aristocrats. Like, if you before Dragon's Maze, if you couldn't beat Aristocrats, you could just forget about entering any tournament with this
That
kind
and
of
Junk
deck.
Reanimator, I would certainly say, yes.
So you had to have a good amount of game. So it tried to hold out until it could get that life gain back to really give it the board position.
Yeah, the removal spells are very cheap. Mizzium Mortis, Tragic Slip. I haven't shown Abrupt Decay because I'm using Tragic Slip as an example of the cheap removal, and then Bonfire of the Damned can just randomly get you out of it. But you'd want to try and make sure the first couple of turns were you killing them creatures or using a Farseek to make sure you hit your turn 4 on on your actual turn 3. Because really the core plays are you getting on the board and doing something that affects your side of the battlefield are these two things. You want to do them as early as possible.
So how did you feel this deck evolved when Dragon's Maze came in?
Right, so the big two cards were Putrefy and Sire of Insanity. Putrefy is an old card. I've got the old version here because I prefer the art. But Putrefy destroys an artifact or a creature. Previously the deck struggled with artifacts and enchantments. It still can struggle with enchantments, just Abrupt Decay can deal with the cheaper ones, there just aren't that many. But this helps against artifacts. But it's the fact that it kills a creature without it being able to regenerate. Black-green's surprisingly easy on the mana. Previously it played Murder, which was double black mana, which is actually quite hard, getting 2 of the same colour. And so this is just very strong. A couple of the cards that you do want to kill actually do regenerate. One of them actually from Dragon's Maze itself, Varol's the Scar Striped. He's a very strong card. Being able to stop it from regenerating, very good. Sire of Insanity added a completely new dimension to the deck. Previously, I've got one in the sideboard, there is one in the deck. Previously, the deck played this card, Rakdos' Return. X mana and 2, deals them X damage, they discard X cards, very strong. But having it resolve against a counterspell deck, where it's the most effective, isn't so easy to make it happen. But because of the old card, Cavern of Souls, you can now name Demon, or I just named Sire of Insanity because I can't remember any of these creature types. But you name Demon, you cast a Sire of Insanity, and they have to have a way not of countering it, but of getting it off the board at instant speed. And when it's got a 4 toughness and a lot of the removals, something like Searing Spear, that can be a bit tricky for them.
Now the white-blue decks that have the unsummons, it obviously sets up a really tough situation against that deck, because of course if there's no board presence at all, and they stack the ability for to go off at the end of the turn, and then they can unsummon in response.
Right, because this triggers end of turn, so when it resolves, you both discard
something in play. So you've got to watch out for certain situations like that.
Yeah, you have to play it smart. You have to play it either early enough that they don't have anything in play themselves, or they can't do anything in response.
Or you have enough threats already out on the table that they can't deal with them all.
If they've got an unsummon in the graveyard, and I think they can go Snapcaster unsummon, but I have a Thragtusk in play as well as my Sire of Insanity, then I'm just going to play my Sire of Insanity because I fancy my chances of my Thragtusk against their Snapcaster and us both drawing off the top.
Yeah. So, what other decks do you consider to be good bad matchups right now? Because obviously you must have done a lot of testing with it. You must have at least some idea.
Always test, kids. I don't know.
What the archetypes we're expecting on a day like this?
I'm expecting the Junk Reanimator, Black-White-Green Reanimator, using Mulch and Grizzly Salvage to put things in the graveyard and use...
In the previous round, Jack Mitchell-Burns came up against that.
Right.
And it was a fantastic 3 games to watch.
It's very strong. I have 2 Ground Seal main and 1 after sideboard, and this stops card in graveyards being the target of spells and abilities, so it turns off Unburial Rites.
And because it replaces itself...
Yeah,
it's absolutely fine.
It's free against everyone else, but you don't want to play all 3 main because it does cost 2 mana, which can be a lot of time against the aggro decks. But against Reanimator, if you get a Ground Seal down and then Sire of Insanity, they dump their hand, they can't reuse their graveyard, so they're drawing off the top, and you're typically in quite a good situation at that point. So that's a deck that I don't think I'm favoured against. I've beaten it twice today, but it can go either way.
Yeah.
It really depends what's happening. There's the Black-White-Red Aristocrats deck, which has Falkenrath Aristocrat and Cartel Aristocrat that's quite strong. Bonfire of the Damned's quite good against them, and I actually have a cheeky sideboard slot card for against the Aristocrats deck. There's also the Black-White-Green one, which uses the aforementioned Varol's the Scar-Striped, who with Young Wolf actually has quite a good... I think that's what Jack's playing,
that's
actually.
right,
That's a very strong deck. We tested that on... and it was surprisingly good. I was amazed at how good a deck with 8 1/1s for 1 could be.
Now, obviously, this is a PTQ, and tomorrow we have the WMCQ.
We do.
Same format, standard.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any last-minute tweaks going from today to tomorrow that you might make to the deck based on the metagame?
I would have to think about my sideboard. The main deck is just a 60 cards I've lifted from the internet.
And you think it's just as solid can be?
Yeah, the last weekend I searched for the PTQ.
So who built this deck originally?
I think it was Owen Turtonwald, but I don't know exactly. Basically, last weekend there were 5 PTQs in America. If you search on Google for PTQ Theros results, you will find a list of deck lists from the top 8s. I found Jund was in the top 2 of 4 of them. In one of them it was first and second. I think
now,
that's right.
When you're looking at a top 8 list, do you look primarily at who's in the final, or do you look at who's in the top 8?
Oh, the top 8. I would weight it slightly towards the final, but they've all won so many matches to get to the top 8. There's no reason why you should discount 8 behind first. It's
so
just
you
2 more
see
rounds.
A bunch of decks,
yeah,
quite a lot of them, but they all lost in the quarters. You'll still take that.
It's still a good deck. I mean, I might think about how to tweak it to beat that top 8, but yeah, ultimately it's still going to be a good deck, isn't it?
So, like I said, we've got this WMCQ tomorrow. You're happy with the main deck. What do you think are the MVPs coming out of this sideboard then right now, and why are they in there?
MVPs from the sideboard. Well, in my sideboard, I'll just scoop these across. I have a bit of a random selection, really. For cheap removal spells, I have Abrupt Decay, a 3rd Mizium Mortars, because I have 2 in the main deck, and 3 Pillar of Flame. And I also have this Sever the Bloodline. Sever the Bloodline's an interesting one, because I found that I was struggling to get rid of and stay kept rid of an Angel of Serenity from a Junk Reanimated deck. So that's a really good way of keeping it out of them. And it's just fine against aggro decks. I mean, you saw I took out on turn 3 a 4/4, which was good.
So what are we taking out that's not very good against aggro out of the deck for these cards to be able to come in?
Generally, the big spell, the things that cost a lot of mana that you're not going to have enough time to play. So the 2 Sire of Insanity and the Rakdos.
These Ground Seals?
And the Rakdos Returns and the Ground Seals, because they just don't do anything. I actually also would take out the Garruk Primal Hunters, although they make 5. Although it makes 3/3s every turn, it doesn't gain me life, and it takes a lot of mana.
By that time you've won, because surely you must have...
Because I haven't died.
To play Garruk out.
Precisely.
Okay, so we shift these cards away.
Those are my cheap removal spells.
We're going to do... That's dealt with the aggro. Now we're looking at...
Well, just for quickly against aggro, I do have 2 more cards, which are Vampire Nighthawks, to lower my curve and make sure I have a relevant creature that's going to deal some more damage. But gaining life again, part of the theme, just keeping me staying in the game.
And that's also against the same kind of mid-range stuff as well, because obviously a Death Touch will deal with whatever big guy that has to swing at you.
It's good against Restoration Angel, which is a card I typically am just going to keep taking 3 from.
Yes.
But I also have this card, Gaze of Granite. It's not my own innovation, other people have it. But it destroys each non-land opponent with a convert mana cost X or less, but it kills Planeswalkers, which is something I struggle with outside of attacking. And it kills things with protection from something. So Cartel Aristocrat, white and a black 2/2, sack a creature, it gets protection from some colour of your choice.
Yes, round that.
If I have at least 2, they can't do anything about it, because it's like Wrath of God. Protection doesn't protect it from that. So that's extremely strong against the decks that try
so
to
you'd
put
need
on
5 mana to deal with all of their 2-drops.
I would, but ideally I'd have cast a Farseek or gained a bit of life or killed something and have stayed alive. I brought it in that matchup. I had it in that last game, and if I hit 1 more mana, I could have killed his Smiter and his Mana Guy and any Domri Raid and left with a Thragtusk versus his Angel, which I'm perfectly happy with, to be honest. So this is a bit of spice. Now everybody's running this card, Deadbridge Chant. It's 6 mana, which is quite expensive. It mills you 10, and then it draws you an extra card each turn. And it looks like it's going to be too slow, and it isn't lightning fast, but it's inevitable. It's very good. It'll get you more lands. The worst it does is get you Farseeks back, but if you've got 9 mat lands in play and you don't want to keep getting a Farseek back to your hand, just stop casting the Farseek. Yeah. You have enough lands. You're doing just fine. But this is very good, and I beat a blue-white-green deck earlier by sort of gamesing his Advent of the Worms, which are basically his only way of really killing me quickly. Saw that he had Dissipate, Unsummon. My hand was this, Thragtusk and Garruk, so I put the Thragtusk into the Dissipate because I cared about it least, and then resolve this.
I noticed you mentioned Slaughter Games, an absolute beast in certain matchups.
I only have 1, but because I found drawing 2 was awkward. A lot of decks you want to... it's against the slow decks. Yes. Generally you want to name Sphinx's Revelation.
Control decks now, isn't there, with just like Aetherling as the only win condition, or
yes, if they have only basically if they have few enough win conditions that you can take them with the sort of games, then you do that. But if they've got say Advent of the Worm and Aetherling, I would prefer to take Advent of the Worm. If they're just really on stone nothing and just trying to draw cards, then I'll name Sphinx's Revelation and get it out of there. But it's not as important as it used to be to name Sphinx's Rev. I have the 3rd ground seal, as mentioned before, for the reanimated decks, and a 2nd Rakdos' Return for the same thing, just to reinforce this discard your hand is not going anywhere strategy. And then 2 last cards, which are a bit spicy. Often people use another 2 Liliana of the Veil. Thundermaw Hellkite, people have them. Like, some people have 2 of these cards, most people have none. I'm just playing 1 of each. Thundermaw Hellkite kills Lingering Souls tokens and is very good at just being a Lava Axe, like 5 damage to the face when you just need to get in because of the haste. No other creature in your deck has haste, so Bonfire of the Damned is closest you can get to just I've damaged you and I need to finish you off. Underworld Connections is really good in a slow, grindy match.
5 Rex Arena always used to be a fine card.
Exactly. You're playing Farseek. You tend to have far too many lands anyway. What's the problem with cutting 1 out?
So the question I want to finish up with is a really interesting question, because obviously you've been playing for 8 or 9 rounds. We've now banned you from playing this deck tomorrow. What are you playing?
I'd probably play Jack's deck, the black, white, green one. Either that or the banned Flash deck with Advent of the Worm. I think they're both very strong decks.
Okay, well, good talking to you, and hopefully we'll be seeing you in the top 8.
I sincerely hope so this time.
There's quite a lot of people who will be looking at IDing this last round, and probably quite a lot that won't be, so
yes.
It'll be a hell of a round, and hopefully you can pick up our coverage for the next round, and hopefully another good game of Magic.